What if I told you that right now your brain is being influenced by forces you're completely unaware of? That the decisions you think are entirely your own might actually be the result of psychological manipulation. Techniques that have been studied and perfected for decades. Today, we're diving deep into the dark psychology of influence, the same techniques used by cults, governments, and marketers to control human behavior. Let's start with a simple question. Would you lie about what you can clearly see just to fit in with a group? Your immediate answer is probably absolutely not. But psychologist Solomon Asch proved that you're wrong in his famous experiment. Asch showed people a simple task: match the length of lines on cards. The answer was obvious, but here's the twist. The person being tested was surrounded by actors who all gave the same wrong answer. The results were shocking. Nearly three-quarters of people went along with the group, even when they the group was wrong. When interviewed afterward, these people admitted they didn't believe their chosen answer was correct. They just couldn't handle being the odd one out. Think about this. There are no penalties for being wrong. No threats, no consequences. Just the psychological pressure of disagreeing with others. But here's where it gets interesting. The conformity effect completely disappeared when just one other person gave the correct answer. This tells us something crucial about human psychology. We're wired to seek group approval even at the cost of our own judgment. Now let's talk about the bystander effect. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment building. 38 people witnessed the attack, which lasted half an hour. Not one person helped her or even called the police. Psychologists Darley and Latane conducted experiments that revealed the disturbing truth. The more people present during an emergency, the less likely anyone is to help. In one study, when students were alone and saw smoke pouring under a door, 75% investigated within 4 minutes. But when they were in groups, only 38% of groups had even one person get up to check. Why does this happen? It's called diffusion of responsibility. When you're alone, you must act because there's no one else. But in a group, everyone assumes someone else will handle it. The result? Nobody acts. Here's where things get really manipulative. Once you commit to something, even something small, you become psychologically invested in defending that commitment, even when it makes no logical sense. Researchers discovered this through a brilliant experiment where they asked homeowners to put a huge ugly sign on their front lawn promoting environmental awareness. Most refused, as you'd expect, but with another group, they first asked people to put a small sign in the window. Once people agreed to this tiny request, they were far more likely to agree to the big ugly sign later, even when asked by a completely different person about a completely different issue. Why? Because by taking the first small action, people started seeing themselves as the kind of person who does these things. And the big request became consistent with their new self-image. This is called the foot in the door technique. And it's used everywhere by salespeople, political campaigns, and yes, cults, but it gets darker. Professor Charles Kiesler discovered the boomerang effect. When people are attacked for a position they've committed to, they don't back down. They double down even if their original commitment was weak. This explains how moderate people can become extremists. First, get them to make a small commitment, then attack them for it, and their natural psychological response is to strengthen their position to justify their original decision. Now we get to the big one, cognitive dissonance. This might be the most important psychological concept you'll ever learn because it explains why people believe obviously false things and defend obviously bad decisions. Cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable feeling you get when you hold two contradictory beliefs or when your actions contradict your beliefs. And your brain hates this feeling and will do almost anything to resolve it, including changing your beliefs to match your actions, Leon. Festinger proved this with a religious cult that predicted the end of the world. When the prophecy failed, did the followers abandon their beliefs? No, they decided their faith had actually saved the world and they became even more committed to recruiting new members. But the most disturbing experiment involved students doing boring, repetitive tasks who were afterward asked to lie to other students, telling them the task was interesting. Some were paid $20 to lie. Others just $1 later, when asked their real opinion about the task, something fascinating happened. The students paid $20, admitted it was boring. But the students paid only $1 actually convinced themselves the task was interesting. Why? The $20 group could justify their lie by saying, I did it for the money. But the $1 group couldn't use that excuse. So, to resolve the dissonance between their actions and beliefs, they changed their beliefs. This explains why hazing works. Why people defend bad purchases and why abuse victims often defend their abusers. The more you suffer for something, the more valuable your brain decides it must be. Your beliefs don't just change your mind, they change your physical reality. The Placebo Effect proves that believing you're getting treatment can actually cure you, even when you're just taking sugar pills. In one case, a man suffering from severe nausea was given a drug that normally causes vomiting, but he was told it would cure his nausea. And it worked. People given different colored placebo pills report different effects. Red pills are more stimulating, blue pills more calming, and some people even report side effects from sugar pills. Your expectation of reality literally becomes your reality, which is why positive thinking works, why confidence creates success, and why believing you'll fail often leads to failure. Here's something that should terrify you. Just seeing a weapon makes people more aggressive even if they're not holding it. Researchers set up a carnival game where students threw sponges at a clown. Sometimes a rifle was visible near the booth and sometimes not. When the rifle was present, students threw significantly more sponges and threw them harder. The researchers concluded that the finger pulls the trigger, but the trigger may also be pulling the finger. And this explains road rage, why violence escalates in the presence of weapons, and why exposure to violent media increases aggressive behavior. Here's perhaps the most practical manipulation technique: role-playing. When you act out a belief or behavior, even as pretend, you start to actually adopt those beliefs. Students asked to argue for positions they disagreed with found their attitudes shifting toward those positions. And the effect was strongest for those who had to improvise rather than read from a script. This is why fake it till you make it works. Your brain can't always tell the difference between acting and being. Even writing about beliefs strengthens them. Students who wrote essays about made-up facts continued believing those facts even after being told they were false, more so than students who just read the information. This is why cults use confession writing, why sales training involves role-playing, and why military training uses realistic scenarios. You become what you practice. Finally, let's talk about the most extreme form of influence: sensory deprivation. When people are isolated from sensory input, kept in dark, quiet rooms with minimal stimulation, their brains become desperate for any input at all. Professor Jack Vernon designed a hypothetical scenario for converting someone's religious beliefs. Using sensory deprivation, after days of isolation, a person would be given two buttons, one playing the same speech supporting their current beliefs, and another playing varied speeches supporting opposing beliefs. The desire for novelty would make them choose the varied content, essentially choosing to listen to propaganda against their own beliefs, and combined with rewards for correct responses, this could completely reshape someone's worldview. Vernon found that suggestibility could increase 4 times after just 2 to 3 days of sensory deprivation. But the effects only lasted about 2 days after returning to normal conditions, unless they were reinforced. This explains why isolation is used in brainwashing, why solitary confinement is so psychologically damaging, and why sensory deprivation tanks can create profound mental shifts. So how do you protect yourself from these techniques? First, recognize that you're not immune. The people in these studies weren't weak or stupid. They were normal people whose brains were working exactly as designed. Second, understand the techniques. When you know how conformity, commitment, and cognitive dissonance work, you can catch them in action. Third, cultivate independent thinking. Seek out diverse viewpoints. Question your assumptions, and remember that if everyone around you believes something that's not proof it's true, it might be proof of mass manipulation. Fourth, be especially wary when you're isolated, stressed, or facing major life changes, because these are when you're most vulnerable to influence. Finally, remember that influence isn't always malicious. These same techniques can be used to help people quit smoking, exercise more, or overcome phobias. And the key is being aware of when they're being used on you. The human mind is incredibly powerful, but it's not perfect. And by understanding its weaknesses, you can better protect yourself from those who would exploit them. What do you think? Have you noticed these techniques being used in your own life? Let me know in the comments below, and if you found this valuable, hit that subscribe button because understanding how your mind works is the first step to truly controlling your own destiny.